So, Kat, would you like to tell us what you do here and where we are and all that kind of stuff?
Yes. I'm Kat. I am our events manager. And I've been working for Victoria Bass now for, I think I'm about to come up to my 5-year anniversary actually, so about 5 years. My role in the organisation is to generate income to support it, really. That's what my job is. But I'm also an archaeology graduate. I'm very interested in social history.
From the University of Manchester.
From the University of Manchester, that is correct. And so I spend a fair amount of my spare time researching some aspects of the social history of the building. We're stood right now in the females' pool on the balcony, which would have originally have housed the baths that were used for people to wash in, rather than, we weren't just a swimming pool, we were also a bathhouse and had a wash house outside too. So we don't really normally let people up on the females' balcony due to the state of disrepair of the roof and also the really uneven floor. So,
would you like to explain why you're here?
Well, I'm on a day out, to be honest. No, I'm Ian Miller. I'm the director of the Greater Manchester Archaeological Advisory Service, so I'm just fascinated by the archaeology of Manchester and its history and its fantastic buildings. But I've always had a real passion for industrial archaeology, which goes hand in hand with
yes, it does.
Industrial history. You know, I take my students every now and again, you want to see Rome, go to Rome, they've got loads of it. If you want to see medieval stuff, you can try Chester or York, but if you want to see the physical remains of the industrial period, there's no better place in the world than Manchester. And I think this building really typifies it. It's just dripping civic pride.
It is, yes.
It really is. This really is the pinnacle of this monument class that was so important to the well-being of industrial Manchester population.
And you've excavated a number of bathhouses.
Yeah, early ones. Yeah, I mean, really as a monument type, public baths arrived in Manchester in 1846.
Outside, where I park the bike, there's first-class males, second-class males and females. And in the conversation earlier, can you just talk a little bit about the class categories? Because they're not really classes, are they?
The class categories they did the best that they could really to try and divide the classes. There are 3 pools in Victoria Baths. There's the male's first-class pool, and the rest of its facilities, and then the male's second-class pool, and then the female's pool as well, which is where we are at the moment. And they each have their own entrance ways, and written above them all in brickwork is the name of each of the pools, so it's quite clear which entrance you go through at the front of the building. It's one of the big talking points actually about the building, the fact that it still says this and it has this kind of like not only gender division but class division as well. The distinction was purely between the males' classes, price-based. So you could, if you wanted to, save up all of your money and go swimming in the male's first-class pool, but most people wouldn't have. They would have wanted to have gone more regularly rather than using the different facilities. And then also in the females' pool, they used to have what they called clean and dirty days, based on how long the water had been in the pool for. So that, which is also distinguished by price. So there were class divisions within the females' pool as well. So it wasn't necessarily class; it was more what you could afford. Because the people used to come and bathe here, then it would have worked. You wouldn't really have had much of a crossover. People would have tended to have stuck to what they could afford. But yeah, technically, you could have saved up and gone and been a first-class male for the day.
That's called social mobility, isn't it?
Yes.
So Ian, you mentioned before about competition when we saw that podium, and now we're in this room that's got the
viewing gallery around the top.
Yeah, so do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
It's just something that interests me, and it's the evolution and the progression of swimming pools. When they first introduced it, was very, very, very much about public health, getting people to actually find somewhere for them to wash their clothes in the laundries that were normally attached to these places, and that was to fight disease, etc. But as the 19th century progressed, we get to the 1880s, the 1890s, there was a bit of a transition really from those purely health benefits to more of a sort of social well-being and sport, competitive sport. And I think really in Manchester we need to be very proud of that heritage really, because this pool and a lot of the other pools in Manchester are often frequented by, like Captain Webb's a very famous name, the guy who swam the first guy who swam the Channel. He would come and do exhibitions in the pools and kind of encourage people to actually use swimming as a sport. I mean, when the swimming pools were first built in the 1850s, the 1860s, they weren't necessarily for people to swim up and down, they were for people to get clean. And that evolution into a sort of sport facility and actually use the pools for swimming as a sport, you know, that was quite a new thing. And I think that's a really important piece of our heritage, which, you know, it can be reflected today. You know, the recent Winter Olympics in China, Team GB did absolutely remarkable. And I'd like to think that hasn't come from nowhere. You know, it's come from a long tradition, really, of having facilities like this.
Can you tell us about this space that we're in at the moment, Kat, and the fact that many people will not get the opportunity to be stood in here like this?
Yes, this is the second floor of the superintendent's flat. The first floor is accessible to the public. We do guided tours through that part of the building, but this floor is normally locked off because although the building is partially restored throughout, this part of the building has even less sort of restoration work done to it, so we don't really let people come up here. But these are the bedrooms from the flats. The flats had 5 bedrooms, and they were really big. A very sort of, it's interesting you were saying about the walls being so thin in comparison to the rest of the building, but there was still that opulence in terms of the scale of the living quarters, which are quite unusual, really.
And you were saying that a number of superintendents lived in here over, what was it, 50 years or something?
Yeah, 1906 to 1974, I think.
All right, so 70 years.
Yes.
So with the job would come the space.
Yes.
But then when you finish the job,
yes.
you move.
Yeah, and there were families here as well. It wasn't obviously just the superintendent in a 5-bedroom flat. And there was a lady who came on one of the tours who was born in these flats. So they would live here with their father and their whole family, and then when the job ended, they'd go and move somewhere else. There's people with really strong ties to these flats.
So if this superintendent's office sort of serviced all the other baths, I'm assuming the baths that you've seen wouldn't have had something like this associated with them.
No, the early ones did. And the Greengate baths, that was really one of the first in the 2 cities, Manchester and Salford. That was purpose built in 18... crikey, was it Greengate, 1850, with the superintendent's accommodation on the top floor, which is for us.
Oh, so the same as this?
Same thing, yeah, same layout. Well, I'm assuming by 1906, they must have amalgamated the sort of supervision of it and actual running of it to one department, perhaps. But I think some of the other baths still had like an overseer just for theirs, but some don't take overview of the full facilities that the corporation were providing, which is 20-odd baths, you know, that day. So,
can you just tell us where we are and why people might be familiar with this, even though they don't know they are?
Sure. So this is the filtration room. We're in one of the outbuildings at the back of the building. Behind us are the original sand filters. Well, these aren't the original filters themselves. These were installed in the 60s, but they're pretty much identical to the original filters. And actually are almost identical to the filters used now. They haven't really changed too much. And over there is the chlorifiers and the way they heated the water. But this part of the building is most famously known for being used as Thomas Shelby's gin distillery in Peaky Blinders. So the tanks aren't actually made of copper. They're just coated in paper that is painted copper. We've not got loads of copper sat out in an outbuilding. So these were the gin stills, and then stood just here is part of one of the scenes where one of the characters fell and hit his head on the pipework, and we still have the covering on it now as a sort of memento of the filming that they did here.
So do people get access to this space normally, or is this again out of bounds?
This is an out-of-bounds part of the building. We do sometimes do a kind of off-limits guided tour of the building and take people into here, but generally this part of the building isn't in use for public access.
Ian, you're disappointed that we're talking about this, aren't you?
Yes.
What would you prefer to talk about?
The glorifiers.
So go on, what are these?
It is a real one.
Whoa. Do you know if that was original to the building?
It's original, yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. We talked before about, got to empty the bath
Yeah.
every few days when they give it cheaper at the end of the week at the cheaper classes or cheaper entry fee. But there's a huge amount of money is being wasted by draining the pool and refilling it. That all costs money.
Yeah.
Why can't we filter the water?
Yeah.
How do you do it? Royals came up with the answer effectively by sucking water out, sending it through these calorifier tanks, which also heat it up as well. But you can also infuse chlorine in.
Earl and Manchester.
Salford.
It is Salford.
Yeah, but yeah. So Royals actually introduced this system, but they were still messing about with it. I mean, the first pioneering one was 1902, I think.
And this was original to 1906.
This was original to the building. We have aerators as well in the water tanks.
Really?
Yes.
So this is really cutting edge
Yes.
technology, in a few years we've been introduced. And as Kat said before, we're still using this effectively,
Yes.
the same sort of system in 21st century pools. But this is where it was born.
Yes.
Is Royals still going as a
I think,
company?
I'm not sure actually.
Right.
I have a feeling that they do exist, but as a subsidiary to
Yes.
other engineering companies. But don't quote me on that.
So, could you tell us a little bit about the role Jill Wright played in getting Victoria Baths on the map, if you like?
Yes. Jill Wright was incredibly important to this building and its survival. She was involved with Victoria Baths. Well, for a start, as a bit of background to Jill, she was an incredibly passionate swimmer and had the most amazing devotion to historic swimming in particular, but swimming as a whole. It was quite remarkable being around somebody who has such a concentrated passion for something. And she actually also set up a group called Historic Pools of Britain, was involved in the setup of it, which is a collection of historic pools and lidos in Britain that provide a sort of network for resource sharing and support. But with Victoria Baths, Jill was, we've dealt quite a lot about the more historic history of Victoria Baths, but its more modern history is very much rooted in the community. And this building was saved by protests from the local community. It was scheduled to be demolished after it closed in 1993, and the local community protested outside of the town hall, and that involved Jill Wright, and managed to save the building. And that was when the Friends of Victoria Baths was set up, which she was very formative as a member of, and then later the Charitable Trust was established, and she was our first ever employee. She was involved in the project for over 20 years and fought tooth and nail for this building to remain standing in as good a condition as it is. She sadly passed away in 2021, at the start of 2021. And is in some way remembered through a Jill Wright Memorial Fund, and then also the award at Manchester University, which was quite incredible actually. I'm sure she would have absolutely adored that. But she is still extremely important in the story of this building to date, and the building wouldn't be standing, and in the state that it's in if it wasn't for Jill and her fierce dedication to swimming and historic swimming in particular.
So it's interesting in relation to what you were saying earlier about you know, industrial Manchester and this being an amazing example, but it takes a member of the public to highlight that to the council.
I think I find it shocking really that as late as the 1990s, a building of this calibre was even thought of for demolition. Although, you know, we have lost, I wouldn't say similar buildings, but we've lost other bathhouses since then. And they still continue to get eroded, but I just cannot imagine Manchester without this building. I mean,
It's interesting when you were talking about things like civic pride, and that obviously being like the council's kind of projection of that, but then in later years it was more of the community and the pride that it has and the importance it imbued. I can't even tell you how many people come into this building having swam here, having like, or their parents swam here, or they used to swim somewhere similar, somewhere else. There's all these different connections. We have loads of weddings, people get married here, and it's still building a story now that I think it's just interesting how pertinent that was when the decision was taken to demolish the building, and how much of an uprising there was from the local community to save it. I think it speaks volumes about the community pride, I suppose, in a space like this.